The future is here.
The most powerful supercomputer on planet Earth.
But is Wisconsin ready?
It's a bit of a David versus Goliath situation.
For mammoth data centers.
Are we just going to be the guinea pigs?
To fuel artificial intelligence.
When our citizens are being let out, dragged out in handcuffs.
Don't touch her! This is an abuse of power!
The buck stops at the mayor's desk.
This is a significant opportunity for Port Washington.
This week on Open Record,
data centers must pay their own way.
A 21st century gold rush.
This has the potential to positively impact how much it costs to live here.
Has us headed for an unprecedented power surge. From the Fox 6 studios, this is Open Record. I'm Brian Polson, and I'm here once again by Fox 6 anchor and reporter Carl Deffenbaugh. Hello,
Great
Carl.
to be back with you, Brian.
And we are joined again by Fox 6 political reporter Jason Calvi. Hello, Jason.
Hey, guys.
We are recording this episode on Wednesday, January 14th, 2026. Just a couple of months ago, Meta, the parent company of Facebook, broke ground on a $1 billion data center in Beaver Dam. This year, Microsoft plans to open the first phase of its $7 billion data center campus in Racine County, and Vantage has ceremonially broken ground on its $15 billion Lighthouse data center in Port Washington. These hyperscale facilities are going to consume energy on a scale we have never seen. Today, we're going to talk about the current state of data centers in Wisconsin, the race to build new ones, and how it could all impact our natural resources and how it impacts you, the electricity customer, all of that. But we're going to start with the politics of data centers because there's a lot going on there, and we're going to do that right after this.
We are back here on Open Record. Safe to say data centers are here. They are coming. This is the future. And of course, with that comes a lot of political disagreements here in this battleground state. Jason, I know you've been looking into a lot of this because all of this is so new. All of this is happening seemingly by the day. Where do Republicans and Democrats in Wisconsin seem to fall on this issue?
It's interesting. Both parties, I think, admit and will tell you that right now state law has not caught up with what we're seeing with this flood of interest in setting up data centers here in Wisconsin. So both sides, Democrats and Republicans right now, are proposing plans for how to regulate. They both admit there needs to be regulation on these data centers, and they both have competing plans for how to deal with that.
It's so interesting, though, that sometimes when issues develop before the politics has developed, it's kind of hard to know if many people take cues. Tell me how I should feel about this issue. And if you look to a political party right now in Wisconsin, you may not get very clear direction because this hasn't found its sort of partisan lines at this point. Is that right?
And that's what Charles Franklin at the Marquette poll was saying as well. When he did a poll back in October, he asked the first time asking this question: what do you think about data centers? Are they going to be good for the state? Or are they going to be bad? And 55% of the people that responded to that poll said the costs are going to outweigh the benefits. 45% said the benefits will outweigh the cost. So the majority of the state, more than a majority of the state, thinks that these things are not going to be a good deal for the state.
And that broke down fairly evenly among Republicans and Democrats, right? There wasn't necessarily the split we see on other issues.
That's exactly right. Republicans and Democrats are evenly split on this issue. They're kind of both sides feel like these are not good for the state.
Of course, I mean, any of us who are old school journalists also understand that when there's this much money involved and this much in terms of natural resources and other things involved, that there will be politics that will develop out of this, right? And does it feel like right now both parties are sort of getting a sense of where do we stand on this and where are we going to draw our lines?
When you guys look back at the 2024 gubernatorial elections in New Jersey and Virginia, Virginia has, I believe, the most amount of data centers in the country. And the cost of utility bills have been skyrocketing in these states. And people really were concerned about the cost of living, their utility bills. And that became a key issue in the politics of those gubernatorial races in both of those states, New Jersey and Virginia in 2024. Is it going to be the same here in Wisconsin in 2026? I think potentially yes, because these data centers are popping up across the state. And people's utility bills are going up.
We've already seen some of the candidates for governor, at least on the Democratic side, answer some questions about this already. When it comes to the competing proposals now from Democrats in the state legislature and then just this week a plan from Republicans, what is the common ground and then what are the key differences between those two different views for how Wisconsin regulates this future?
Both sides, the Democratic bill and the Republican bill, call on transparency. So how much water are you using? That needs to be reported either to the state or to the local utility, and it needs to be reported publicly on websites so you can check it out and figure out what are we asking for as far as water, electricity usage as well. Both of them are calling for transparency. Both of them have different restrictions in place, and we can go into both of those as well. The Republican bill says that no costs associated with building the new infrastructure, because these data centers, as you mentioned, Brian, they use a ton of power. And so utility companies are needing to build more power plants. We're seeing that across the country to give
more power lines to get the electricity to these places.
The transmission lines as well. So the Republican bill says normally when you build a power plant, we'll hear from We Energies in a little bit about how this all plays out. But normally when you build a power plant, it's divided amongst all of the customers. All the customers are paying for the infrastructure because they're all utilizing the transmission lines, the upgraded transmission lines, and the new power systems. In this situation, the question is, well, these companies are using so much power. Is it fair to then take all that infrastructure that's going to need to be improved and added to the system? Is it fair to charge that to Joe Smith at home? And what the Republican bill says is no. And this is something that We Energies agrees on. I'll get to that in a second. But the Republican bill says that the costs associated with the new infrastructure must be handled by the data centers.
When it goes back to that Marquette poll, I'd be curious too, that cost-benefit analysis that the people voting in that poll were weighing in on. Does it feel a bit like an arms race right now? You mentioned Northern Virginia kind of ahead of the game with all the data centers that have gone in. Other parts of the country are trying to catch up. Clearly, Wisconsin is a major player in this as well. Tell us about that cost-benefit.
Yeah.
What folks are hoping the gains would be for Wisconsin with the increase in these centers, because ultimately they don't employ that many people. They're mostly servers.
Well, at the end of the day, yeah, the technicians that are going to keep these things running in the future, minimal staff for that. But we are seeing thousands of jobs being created for construction crews right now on the ground in Wisconsin. So for example,
during the construction phase, obviously a lot of blue collar jobs, a lot of good jobs local jobs. But the question is long term.
Right. So, for example, the Microsoft plan down in Racine County, they estimate right now they've got about 3,000 construction workers who right now are building that what they're going to call the world's biggest and most powerful supercomputer. Are going to be down there in Racine County, Wisconsin, right? So 3,000 construction workers working on that project right now. And then once the projects are complete, they're estimating about 400 permanent jobs for that center.
I want to step back for 1 second because we were talking a lot about, we jumped right in. I'm glad we did. But I think for the person who's watching this going, what exactly is a data center? What's there? And then you guys have reported on this. What's inside these giant buildings?
We have a room similar to this at Fox 6. You go inside, it's very air conditioned, and there's just banks and banks of servers, right? That operate computers, that store data, that are able to do all those things that we do on our phones and send to the cloud. Well, that cloud actually looks like a physical center. But the scale of these, Jason, maybe you can describe, because you've actually seen some of the construction projects, absolutely massive, right?
I mean, you're talking about, I don't know the exact mileage that we're talking about. We're talking about massive farm fields that are now being cleared, and they're building these large buildings in
for Microsoft. It's like a 1,900 acre site, right?
Just full of computer servers, basically.
Yes.
Largely, right?
Yeah.
You know what I imagine? And I'm going to date myself here. Do you remember the movie War Games?
I just watched that over holiday break.
The Whopper?
Oh, so
I forget
good.
what the Whopper stands for. WOPR, war or something, whatever. But it's the computer that's calculating all of the global thermonuclear war possibilities.
Instead of chess or tic-tac-toe.
And it really was kind of the first AI that I can remember as a kid was that computer. This is just Whopper on a grand scale. Is that, right?
Or we can talk about Terminator.
Well,
AI could scare us in a lot of ways.
Hollywood doesn't seem to be in favor of that.
But I guess the reason I bring it up is if you bring a giant, I don't know, I'm trying to think of, this may be a bad analogy, but when the announcement that Foxconn was coming here, there were going to be thousands of jobs, supposedly, that were going to go forward off into, an endless number of years, and they were going to be producing things here. When you have a data center, it's not like there's products coming out of there that I'm going to see at the store, or that there are going to be, thousands of jobs. It's doing a bunch of stuff, but it's sort of doing it for everyone. So I do wonder. Microsoft, of course, and all these other Vantage and all these others, they love the idea that we got Lake Michigan here. They love the idea that we've got land, but what is the benefit to Wisconsin?
It was interesting. I was listening to something that more specifically was focused on Northern Virginia, preparing for this conversation today. And one of the analysts from a business school out east was referencing the difference between a data center and a software company. If you think about technology, to a lot of us, that's kind of all encompassing. A data center, basically they were saying that the investment, basically 1% of the investment that we're seeing in these data centers coming from a software company, that is people actually living there, working there, and the return on investment from those physical humans working at a company like that would match this grand scale of investment for a data center. While on the other side, they said, again, Northern Virginia, a perfect example, that those data centers can kind of be a foothold for future tech companies to come. And that even when we think of all this cloud computing and everything, proximity, physical proximity to those ones and zeros being computated by all those servers actually still matters. So at least in Virginia, they have seen a number of other tech companies that want to come to the area to kind of link themselves to that massive computing power in that part of the country. Jason, I'd be curious what you're hearing in terms of, again, why Wisconsin wants to be competitive in this market.
I mean, think about, just the name recognition of saying Wisconsin's going to be the home of the world's most powerful supercomputer. You put that on. You can put that on the bill. The welcome sign to Wisconsin, home of the world's most powerful supercomputer. I mean, it could potentially be seen as leading in calling other people to the state of Wisconsin, tech companies, and say, hey, if Microsoft is investing more than $7 billion with a B, $7 billion into Wisconsin, what about you? Can you do $1 million?
Are we like Silicon Valley 2.0 at that
maybe.
point? I mean, is that the hope? I don't know.
But since
at the
Brian
same
mentioned it, though, that name, Foxconn, continues to come up with a number of these plans. How often do you hear that, Jason? Something that was once billed as the eighth wonder of the world, right? And clearly has not come to fruition to that degree.
The supporters of Foxconn said, we built the infrastructure on the land for Foxconn, and that then allowed for Microsoft to come in and do what they're doing now. I mentioned the construction jobs. I mentioned the permanent jobs that are going to be there after construction wraps. So that they're building 2 data centers down there at the Racine County location. The first phase is going to be done, I believe, in 2026. And that's going to have 400 permanent jobs just in that first phase. And then the second phase will begin 2027, potentially, or after that as well. So then you're going to have a couple other 100 extra jobs for that second data center.
This is such a big issue right now that we have the Wisconsin Policy Forum has spent some time digging into this. And I think it's maybe just on the front end of what it's going to be doing in terms of research. And we have a special guest with us here today to talk about it. And that is Tyler Burns, the man who put that report together for Wisconsin Policy Forum. And we're going to talk to him right after this here on Open Record. We are back on Open Record. Want to welcome Tyler Burns to the podcast. Wisconsin Policy Forum report just out this month on data centers and how they may change Wisconsin's utility landscape. They're going to change the utility landscape. First of all, Tyler, thank you for being a guest here on Open Record.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. I appreciate the interest. It's a big topic right now, and I'm glad we were able to add a little bit to the conversation.
One of the things that stood out to me in your report, and I know that you're also looking at other reporting that's out there to gather some of this, but I think it was the number of data centers that currently exist. Well, you see there's 40-something data centers, and you go, wait a minute, I thought these were these massive things. Where are these 40? The existing, if I understand right, the existing data centers are not quite on the scale of what is coming. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's correct. And you were talking about, you have a little server room in your studio. These things are out there, but it's the scale of them, right? The word they use for these new ones is hyperscale. They use a whole gigawatt of electricity all at once, and that is the real big difference. And the demand for computing power and the investment in these things is really driving. We don't have 40 of the hyperscale data centers going in the state right now. We do have some pretty big ones, but not quite the same, not the $15 billion data centers like you were talking about in the earlier segment.
I'm going to keep referencing old movies. This is the last time I'll do it, I swear. But,
no, it's not.
But when you said gigawatts, and I think back to the Future, do you remember?
Yep, absolutely.
What 21 gigawatts? Was he saying gigawatts?
I believe so. I have a friend of mine, we used to go to college together. We used to sort of dare each other to do stuff. He said, in one of your interviews, say gigawatts, not gigawatts. I have resisted.
Was it the GIF thing before we knew what those were even?
But the reason I bring it up, though, is there's a real practical. You think about what he was saying back then is that was an amount of energy that was unfathomable. Right. And that unfathomable amount of energy is what we're talking about some of these data centers using. This is a massive amount of energy, right, Tyler?
It is a massive amount of energy. And, that's why I wrote this report, actually, is I heard these big numbers bouncing around, and one of the things we do at Policy Forum is try to put really big numbers in context. When you talk about state budgets and you're talking about billions of dollars, you need some context to know, is 100 million a lot? Is a billion a lot? Well, in the right context, sometimes it's not. So, I wanted to have a sense of, okay, so let's say one of these things is using a gigawatt of energy all at once, or if they're using a gigawatt hour of energy over the course of the year, how much is that? And, statewide, each year, electrical municipalities sell about 65 or so, 63 gigawatt hours of electricity. And so say you're using 1 gigawatt hour, that's about 1.5% of that. That's pretty substantial for one facility, but it's also not half of what we're using statewide. We've been seeing a decline in the amount of electricity used over the course of a year, pretty substantial decline, almost 10%. We've also been seeing a decline in the amount of electricity used at one time. That's gone down a little bit more slowly, about 2%. But most recently we've used, our peak demand is about 14 gigawatts. And so if you think about that, if you think one of these facilities could potentially use 1 out of every 14 gigawatts of energy generated at once, again, that's a pretty big amount, even relative to statewide electricity use. And that's why, on the electricity side, we say it may reshape the landscape. That's why, the energy utilities are talking about, hey, we're going to need to change how we're generating electricity. We're going to need to add capacity. It's because, the scale of the electricity use is pretty big, even on a statewide scale.
Go ahead. Yeah. Well, so when you were talking about those numbers, that's what I thought was interesting in your report, is that you said data centers currently use 4%. I think that maybe, I don't know if I got this from your report or elsewhere, but 4% of all electricity in the U.S. And that is expected to maybe as much as double or triple over the next 5 years, but it's still not. I think I've come into this, and maybe it's because of, we've done the same thing as reporters because of things we hear. This is on such a grand scale. You can come away with the impression that these facilities are going to consume 100% of the energy that we currently use on top of what we already have. That's not the case, at least not yet, right?
Yep. Yeah. And that's right. The really interesting thing in doing this study was you can find very credible, Berkeley National Energy Lab did an estimate of nationwide electricity use by these data centers, and that 4% number, we referenced that, but that's where that came from. But it was a lot tougher to find an estimate of exactly how much one data center will use over the course of a year. And I think, you talk about the transparency bills, the sort of folks asking for real good detail on how much energy these things use, how much water these things use. I came across that same difficulty in terms of figuring out, hey, here's how much is being used. And, I do think there's a little bit of, this is a trade secret. It's, this is a private business. They're sort of doing things that they necessarily don't need to be transparent about, at least in their experience. But I think the pushback that we've seen among the public and among legislators would sort of maybe speak to the value of that additional transparency.
You mentioned the word in there as well, water, that maybe Jason can chime in on too when it gets back to some of those competing proposals from Democrats and Republicans. But beyond the power, explain why water is so crucial to these data centers, and then how that could potentially change, because so many of these massive projects are relatively close to Lake Michigan.
Yeah. So, if you're doing all the ones and zeros, all the number crunching, using a lot of electricity, you need to cool off the processors, the video cards, all the stuff that's in those data centers. You need to cool them off. And oftentimes, just like the radiator in your car, you're using water. And that water, it runs through closed systems for the most part, and cools off the water. One thing I learned as we were talking about this is, think about Wisconsin. What's the great part about Wisconsin? If you're trying to keep stuff cool, it's cold outside in the winter. And so, that helps keep that water demand down. But anyway, on the water side, they use tens of millions of gallons a year. And again, that sounds like a tremendous amount. I had done a report about 2.5 years ago about water use in the state. And this is really what got me on this electricity use path. statewide, we sell somewhere in the neighborhood of 120 to 130 billion gallons of water uh, from our municipal utilities, and so that's to customers at home. But then also, industry needs a lot of water. They've got stuff that needs to be cooled. They've got stuff that needs to be cleaned, and so they're major water users. Well, over the last 25 years, we've seen a massive decline in the amount of water, especially used by industrial customers, and so. We're seeing a good example. Their waterworks was selling two billion gallons more water uh, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, than they are today. And so if you have 2 billion gallons of water that they're not selling and you're demanding 10 billion gallons, it's just a completely different scale. It's something like 250 times that amount. And so, the water use, at least of the facilities, a little bit less, at least sort of scale wise, it's not as big of a chunk of statewide water use. Now, when you're generating electricity, you're also using water because, most generally electricity generation is just heating up some water, generating some steam, you're turning a turbine, and that's generating the electricity. And so you do need a lot of water for that. And that's, on the power plant side. And we didn't get as deep into that, but that's another, issue that's been raised. And I think that may have something to do with why sort of the Great Lakes states, as opposed to, a place like Arizona, where we have a lot of water here. We have Lake Michigan. It rains quite a bit. It's not sort of a desert. And I think that's one of the reasons that these companies are interested in Wisconsin.
Tyler, I know that you, as an organization, Wisconsin Policy Forum, that's policymakers do look to your organization sometimes. You've done the data gathering, you've done the research. They looked at that and they go, okay, we're going to use that to inform what we're doing. Are there things that you're hearing that policymakers or others are asking, saying, we really want to know more about this? Because it does seem there's some difficult data to find here. For instance, you mentioned the water use. We don't know how much these water some of these facilities use. We have an idea, but we don't know for certain because they're not reported in other places. Do you have other avenues you're planning to explore that you're hearing there's demand for information? Like, we need someone to dig into this.
Yeah, the big thrust that we're going to look into next is how good of a deal or bad of a deal, and we don't know, we haven't done the research yet, are these data centers for the local governments from a fiscal standpoint. And at Policy Forum, we're really good at understanding, is this good for your budget? Is this bad for your budget? We aren't going to be able to comment on it as much. Is this good for the community? Is this good for your way of life? Is this good for all these other things? Is this good for water quality? That's not really our angle. But on the fiscal side, we're going to look at a few of these agreements and, lay out the pros and cons from a budget standpoint for local government. For the taxpayer, you're going to have to build infrastructure. How much of that is going to be covered by the data center? It is going to add a lot of taxable property to the tax rolls. What will that do to everybody else's property taxes? What are the costs associated with, do you need to add an additional fire engine if you have one of these things in your community? Because there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of stuff. Do you need to have additional EMS capacity associated with having one of these communities? And again, those are just some of the avenues of research we're going to go down when we look at this. That'll be out this summer. But that's kind of the next thing we're going to look at. And then also, the real big question. And you'll have somebody on from We Energies, and I'll talk about this next. But who's going to ultimately pay for this? And the question we raised at the end of our report, and we don't know the answer, and if we did, we might have a different job. But what happens if there's a big change in energy use in 5 or 10 years, and we've built out the infrastructure for these, the generating capacity for these to supply these centers, the transmission capacity to supply these centers, and then there's a change in technology or a change in demand, and suddenly these things operate 10 times more efficient and they don't need as much electricity. Who's going to pay for the infrastructure in that case? And again, we don't know the answer to that question, but it's just something to kind of think about, because if you imagine 10 years ago, people were talking about, frac sand. Frac sand was the massive topic. What's it doing to the air quality? What's it doing to the water? What's with all these trains filled with frac sand? A change in technology and change in price of oil, frac sand's not nearly as in demand. And, again, we can't predict what it's going to look like in the future for electricity demand. We have projections. Projections are good, but sometimes they're wrong. I've made incorrect projections multiple times in my life.
Tyler, it sounds like you have a lot of work ahead of you on this issue.
Yeah, we have research for the next 3 years on this stuff at least.
And I mean, one of the questions you mentioned, the impact on the municipalities, fire engines, and things like that. Another question is these entities are going to be receiving from the state the sales and use tax exemption. So I don't know if your research has yet looked at how much money these companies are saving coming potentially to Wisconsin. Does that make it more attractive to come? And how much are they saving in that sales and tax use exemption? Do you know?
Yeah, and we haven't looked at that in particular, but a lot of counties in the state rely on sales tax, and so if local governments are already relatively stressed from a fiscal standpoint, and so the sales and use tax exemption may, again, we haven't looked at data on it, but that may be a significant impact on county sales tax, and so those are the sorts of things that. These are open questions, and
Carl,
the more information we have, the better.
Carl pointed out this morning, I think it was Brad Smith of
just
Microsoft,
on Tuesday,
just announced this week that they, because they know there's pushback against a lot of these, they're saying we're going to forego these tax incentives. We're going to actually build these things and pay all the costs ourselves. We got to take a break because we got to get Brendan Conway in here from We Energies. But Tyler, thank you so much for your time here on Open Record, and I imagine we're going to be hearing a lot more coming out of Wisconsin Policy Forum on the issue of data centers. But thanks again for taking the time to be with us. Welcome back to Open Record in Jason Calvi's place. We now have Brendan Conway, who knows his way in front of a microphone. He is with We Energies, obviously a journalist here for a long time in Wisconsin, and for a long time now with We Energies. This is an issue you must be talking about an awful lot lately.
A lot of interest, as there should be. This is a big deal for the state of Wisconsin. We think it's a great thing for economic development across the state. We've been really supportive. We're supportive of all of our customers, but this is an opportunity, I think, to bring in a new kind of manufacturing, right? Wisconsin's been leading manufacturing for decades, and now it's a new time, new opportunity to lead even the next generation of manufacturing.
We've certainly seen how this has become such a hot button topic already. We haven't even mentioned some of the council meetings up in Port Washington where people were even arrested recently. So I imagine there's a lot of debate. There's a lot of interest from your customers and certainly fear about what the possible costs could be for an average consumer. What do you think is the biggest misconception about where we're at with data centers in the state right now, and the biggest thing that you guys are kind of focused on?
Two big misconceptions. Number one, there is zero data center costs currently in anyone's electricity or natural gas rates, because we don't have any large-scale data centers yet, right? So these ones that are coming, the way that you recover costs, you don't recover costs until the plants and those type of stuff go into service. So there are zero costs for data centers right now. The other thing, and we've been very clear, as has Microsoft, I know you mentioned, right, Brad Smith, just very vocal this week about it, as has the companies up in Port Washington. We're going to make sure no customers pay for anything we build, and we have a special rate that's being considered right now. Anything we build, any power plants, that's going to all be paid for by the data centers. We've been committed to that, as have Microsoft and Vantage and Oracle and OpenAI.
Yeah. And of course, that is, I'm sure, sounds great to the average customer, but then a lot of people go, okay, but the devil's in the details. I want to know how you're going to do that. And these are very expensive projects, and We Energies is going to have to build a lot of new stuff. And we've seen just recently a bunch of filings with the PSC to build and acquire a bunch of new facilities. So there's a lot of money. I think I as I added it up, I had read it in the Journal Sentinel, and then I looked it up myself in the PSC, which, boy, you can get lost in documents there. Holy cow. But more than $5 billion in new investments. That's a lot of money. How do you ensure that doesn't end up trickling down to the average ratepayer?
So we filed a proposal for a new rate. This was last spring at the Public Service Commission. We expect to make a decision probably in the next few months. There's been a lot of documents being filed around it in the last even few weeks. But it's going to ensure that everything that gets built from power lines, power poles, and certainly the power plants, whether they're solar, wind, natural gas plants, will be paid for by the data centers. Even beyond that, if we have to hire new people, and we will, because these are going to be large customers, they're going to pay for that. They're going to pay for the salaries of anyone new. They're going to pay for the benefits, all the things that flow through there. So we've been thoughtful. There's this ongoing back and forth with the Public Service Commission. So our initial proposal may change a bit. we're okay with that, obviously. But we're going to get to a place working with stakeholders, the Public Service Commission, and other people to make sure that there are no costs that are shifted to customers.
On the other hand, there have been steady rate increases for the average customer in the state going back to, I think, 2013. There's been 7 or so of these increases over the years, and more came this year. Now we're in 2026. So yeah, the new year. What's the reasoning for those rate increases? Because it's not insignificant. It's, $10 a month for some people that it does matter on their monthly bills.
So we looked out, this is 10 years ago or so, looked out at our current power plants at the time. We had a lot of coal plants, a lot of old aging coal plants, and the price of solar panels were coming down significantly. And we looked at, okay, and then of course we had some emissions goals. What can we do as we look in the 10, 20, 30 year time horizon, which we have to do, right? Power plants don't last forever. And we've been closing those older, less efficient fossil fuel plants, mostly coal plants, building these new kind of efficient natural gas and solar, wind, battery storage. And yes, the cost as they go into service go into rates. So the costs increase. But over the long term, versus keeping those old coal plants up and running, adding new emissions, the staff to run those things, we're going to save customers, by one estimate, maybe $2 billion over 20 years, right? Because as we have more solar power, well, then we don't need to buy coal. We don't need to buy natural gas because Mother Nature provides the solar, the wind. We can store that with battery storage and then put it into the grid when it's needed. So there are costs up front. And people should know every single one of these plants gets rigorously approved and looked at by not just the Public Service Commission, but customer advocates, and that final decision is made by that independent body.
I want to come back for a second to the cost sharing or how they're going to take care of these costs. I know there's a term I'd not understood or never heard of before. Now I know VLCs, very large customers, which I think generally applies to these data centers, right?
We created it, so you wouldn't have
right. Yeah. Right. But I saw it in these filings, and if I understand correctly, the proposal right now that's before the PSC would say that these very large customers would cover 75% of these costs, and the other 25% would essentially be spread out among everybody else. Is that right? And tell me where those numbers, why is that the number?
Yeah, so we could get really in the weeds, but no, that's not correct. They will pay for 100% of anything we build for them. There is 2 types of tariffs for the power plants. There is what we call the bespoke resource tariff, so where customers pay for 100% of the energy they're going to get. Oftentimes, let's say we're building a 100 megawatt power solar plant. They're going to get 50% of the capacity, the energy capacity from that. They're going to pay 100% of that 50%. What you're referring to is we have another called a capacity-only power plant, mostly going to be natural gas, at least right now it looks like that way, that they would pay for 75% of the plant to build the plant, right? They would receive very, very little of the energy for it. Any energy they do receive, they would pay 100% for. But we have to increase the capacity in the state, so the ability to have more power at any one moment. And because of their bringing in that, the other 25% that we paid for by customers is because customers will be using that. So
and I'm sorry, that wasn't clear. It's the infrastructure they're paying 75% for. Is that right?
No, then for the infrastructure, they'll pay 100% for.
Okay.
So the only 75% thing, and this has caused some confusion, they'll call these capacity-only power plants. We did it in this way because this is how the Public Service Commission has traditionally looked at how power plants and energy is 75 and 25% is paid for. If that gets changed to the Public Service Commission process, that's something that we'll work with them on, clearly. But that really is, at the end of the day, you can think of any small little kilowatt hour of energy that these data centers are using, they're going to pay 100% for. And anything we're building down to a pole, a wire, something that goes on a power line, they're going to pay for.
Can I ask you, you've mentioned solar, wind, more traditional power sources as well. We know we've seen the fluctuations between administrations at the federal level, from pushes from the Biden administration for more green energy, a reversal from the Trump administration actually closing some wind farms that were in the process of being built. How do you guys as an energy company plan for that long-term future when there's so many different paths that we could go as a country? And even as we talked about with Jason, some of these competing proposals from Republicans or Democrats in Wisconsin, the Democratic proposal would include a large percentage, I think 70% of energy for these data centers coming from renewable energy, versus on the Republican side, there's not necessarily that push. So how do you guys try to project for actually physically providing the power from a certain source for these centers years into the future?
Yeah, I mean, every fall we put out our 5-year capital plan, and that's kind of, we have to start thinking further out. So our current capital plan had about $12 billion in renewable solar, wind, and battery power over the next 5 years, and then about $3.5 billion in infrastructure and power plants around natural gas. What that looks like next fall, as we look out the 5 years, it might change a little bit, but we have to make those long-term plans. It takes a long time. By the time a solar plant is filed, goes through the process, approved, built. That's a couple years it can be, but that's even quicker than a natural gas plant, which is going to take longer than that just because it takes longer to build a natural gas plant. So we have a long-term view. Yes, the politics and the shifting does have some small impact on the margins, but we have to make sure our customers at the end of the day have what they need, which is on a really cold day like today, they're going to be able to heat their homes. On a really hot day in the summertime, they're going to be able to stay cool. At that point, it's not just about comfort. It's about life and death. And so we're going to make sure we have those investments in place.
Well, that's leading to the next question I was going to ask is, when people hear about the amount of electricity that these facilities are going to use, there's immediately fear, are we going to have a future of brownouts and blackouts? And it seems like that's what you're preparing to avoid. Is that right?
Correct. Many of the natural gas plants we have proposed, some that's been approved, some have been proposed and are still in the process, are going to run 20% of the time. They will only run on those days where it isn't very sunny, it isn't very windy. Think of like what we had in early December, or we might have here coming up in the next few days, where it's incredibly cold and everything's running. Everyone's furnace is running, everyone's space heater and all those other things are running. And it's not an option of, well, maybe the wind will come up and save us, or maybe the sun will come out. We have to have that because people need that heat. So really that's the plan. Those things are only going to run when need be. Instead, those, the solar power, the wind power, that's going to run all the time. And then again, to your question earlier, Carl, that's going to lower costs for the long term. Then we're not buying natural gas. We're just letting Mother Nature pay for it.
The one thing we haven't heard, and this is taking a question directly from Jason Calvi off camera right now, is nuclear. Are there plans for We Energies to consider nuclear power plants here in Wisconsin going forward?
We announced middle of last year that we are exploring. We have control of the site in Kewanee, the old site, or the site of the old nuclear power plant. And so we're looking at that. We've made some filings working with a company called Energy Solutions, which is decommissioning. So the old plant was too old didn't make sense up and running. So they're going to decommission that site. If we get regulatory approval from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and if it makes sense and if it pencils out, yes, it's something we're looking at, but that would be a 2033, 2035 build, come into service, those type of things.
To that point, when we go back to older technologies, coal, there's only so much coal. You can build all the power plants you want. There's only so much coal to put in them. You still need resources to create energy. And is there a point at which building up this infrastructure to supply all of these hyperscale plants or the data centers, is there a point at which there's just not enough in terms of natural resources to produce this much electricity?
Well, that's why we have this kind of diverse fuel resources. So to make sure you don't count on everything. And this might sting a little bit after the Packers lost on Sunday, right? But the example I give is you need a good offense, you need a good defense, you need a good special teams, you need kickers that are going to make those field goals. And if not, right, so that's what we have. That's what we have, the solar and the wind and the battery when it's sunny and windy. We have natural gas. We do have coal that we can lean
who's
on.
the kicker? Is it solar? What are we talking about here?
In our example, none. We're going to make sure we have everything, right? Because if you have something that you can't call upon, in fact, last year, because we have that coal plant, natural gas prices spiked in the middle of last year. We were able to run our coal plants more than we had initially planned to, which actually saved customers quite a bit of money than if we had only had natural gas. And so we think that's going to change. America's rich in natural gas. We're the largest producer of it. And so that's where a lot of people are going to in the short and medium term. Is nuclear the solution? Maybe there's some nuclear, maybe there's new technologies. We've been exploring hydrogen and how hydrogen could run in these current natural gas, so we wouldn't have to build a new plant, but you could have a new type of fuel. All sorts of things. Long-term battery storage, we're doing a test on that. So instead of a 4-hour5 to 10 hour battery storage that we're looking at. So there's things to come. But today we have to plan for today and the future.
I'd be curious, just with your background and both in your journalistic experience and certainly what you've been doing professionally with We Energies for a while now, what does this moment feel like for you with all of these data center announcements happening, all of this construction possible, but still so much unknown?
Yeah, I think the energy industry was kind of boring for a long time, right? Even when I joined We Energies in 2018, there hadn't been anything really new built in a long time. And now, it used to be like, we're building a 100 megawatt solar project. That's a big deal, right? Because we didn't do that. Now that's just a Tuesday, right? We have so much new power generation coming online, so many new projects we're working on. It's an interesting time. It's an exciting time. We're okay if people do or don't pay attention to the energy industry. Well, most people, they flip on their lights. That's their daily touch point with
They notice
energy.
when it doesn't come on.
And when it doesn't come on. And so that's what our focus is on. But part of that focus is not just making sure the power lines are up on a windy day. It's making sure that if we have a new customer comes in, we can serve that load without impacting our other customers.
I know we could talk all day. I wish we could talk some more. We're out of time. Brendan Conway, We Energies, thank you for coming here to the FOX6 studio and for being here on Open
thank
Record.
you.
All right, we'll take a break. We will go off the record right after this. And it's time for us to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where you get a little more casual and have a little fun by answering a question, which I usually say none of us is prepared for because Sarah Smith has it. Well, guess what? I didn't prepare one today.
I'm
She's
doing
not
a
here,
bad Sarah Smith impersonation. My bad.
I did come up with a question as we were waiting, and it's because I referenced War Games earlier, and I referenced Michael J. Fox, Back to the Future.
Yes.
So I started thinking about movies, and then I thought to myself, okay, those are great movies. Those are ones that stand the test of time. So I'm going to start. I have two questions. They're related. The first one is, if there's a movie that you see it on, I don't know, I would have said cable, but I don't have cable anymore. But you see it somewhere, or it's on, or you go somewhere, a movie that you will sit and watch the rest of it no matter how many times you've seen it.
My favorite movie of all times, I think this fits that kind of rewatchable thought here, is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So the third installment of the originals with Sean Connery coming in as Harrison Ford's father, as Indy's father. And it is absolutely hands down my favorite movie. It just has scene after scene, whether it's action, whether it's humor, whether it's the interplay between those two. If I catch it, I'm done.
All right, Jason.
I can't think of anything other than I was at a family Christmas party, actually this last weekend in Michigan, and they were sitting down to watch Home Alone 2. And
I just saw that for the first time.
Really?
I'd never seen 2. I'd seen 1.
Okay,
the Talk Boy. Wait, the Talk Boy, it was the recording device he had.
Oh, right, yeah, you're right, yeah.
Which, that's a 1990s thing, I guess. I mean,
Filthy Animal,
I guess Home Alone 1, like if that was on, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But I sat down to watch this movie, but we had to leave, so I didn't get to finish it.
I mentioned during the break to you guys, Shawshank Redemption is one. If it's on, I will watch it all the way through. I've seen it a million times. Morgan Freeman's voice is just like it's an elixir. But the other, War Games is one. But my favorite movie of all time, and I don't see it very often, but if I ever see it, I'm going to watch till the end, and that's the original National Lampoon's Vacation.
Oh, nice.
I can quote that and Fletch. I could quote them all day long. My wife hates that I quote movies. Here's the flip side question, though.
Okay.
The worst movie you've ever seen that you actually watched and thought, why did I waste my time watching this movie?
So I actually have an answer for you, thanks to my cousin Daniel. We'll give him a shout out. He loves horrible movies. And then my uncle, Uncle Roger, loves that Mystery Science Theater.
Yeah,
Mystery.
Right.
They watch terrible movies and comment on it, and it's some of the funniest stuff you hear. So my cousin sought out this movie that we watched with all the cousins at Christmas one year. I believe it is the single worst rated movie on IMDb, at least was at the time. Okay. Manos, Hands of Fate. And just the title alone should tell you everything. It was absolutely horrible and absolutely one of my favorite movie watching experiences because of all the laughs.
But so you were watching it sort of ironically, right? You were enjoying how bad it was. Okay.
In terms of a movie that's probably bad that I love, National Treasure is one of my favorite movies too.
Yeah, those are fun. Those aren't terrible.
Sometimes there's movies that they kind of suck, or it doesn't make sense, or the acting's not great, but you just enjoy it, and that's different. I'm talking about one that you watched and you went, that was abysmal, and I can't believe I wasted my time at it. Do you?
We all love a treasure hunt, and we love history. I mean, it ties it all together. It's a great movie. It kind of ties in with Indiana Jones and things like that. So no, that's not a bad movie at all. There was an Adam Sandler movie that we started watching. Remember, Adam Sandler had all these big movies. What was that, like the late 90s, maybe?
Still doing them,
and the comedy movies,
right.
And there was one, I can't remember. It was like Overboard. I don't even know what the name of it was, but it was before he was famous, but they released it afterwards. And it was jump cuts left and right. It was just atrocious. And I don't even think we finished watching it. It was such a bad movie. Was it called Overboard? Anyway.
No, Overboard was the Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell thing. I remember that way back when. I will say, can't even remember the name of the movie, but I watched, it was a Carrot Top movie. It was so awful. I get Carrot Top's got a thing, but it was the worst movie, and so bad that I can't remember the name of it.
Can I call you out for something completely off topic here, Brian?
What's that?
At this very segment 1 week ago, the first episode of 2026 in Off the Record, you said your goal for the new year was to be in this studio by 9:30 for the taping. What? 1 week later, guess what you were? I was not in the studio by 9:30.
Was I not?
What? You were walking our guest,
I was
Brendan.
escorting Brendan Conway, but I guess I already
I just
failed
thought it was funny. It was your New Year's resolution.
My resolution
lasted 1 week.
Is over. Well, my resolution now is to determine whether it is gigawatts or gigawatts. We are out of time. We've got to take a break and wrap things up, and we come right back. That is all the time we have for this week. If you have a topic you'd like us to discuss on Open Record or an issue you think we should investigate for Fox 6 News, send us an email to FOX6 investigators at fox.com. As always, thank you to the people who make this podcast possible. Carl and Jason, of course, thank you. Brendan and Tyler, our guests today. Tim Primo, who is the man behind the curtain today. And of course, everybody else who does it. I'm not going to name everyone. I'm just going to say with that, I'm Brian Polson. We'll be back next week.